Lacrosse community, my name's Ryan Berns. I'm the president of Lacrosse Leadership Institute. It's our mission to empower all those that love lacrosse, to recognize the skills you gain from the sport, to ultimately live the life of your dreams. Today, we're so fortunate to be joined by someone I think we all know and love. We get to hear him on a weekly basis as we watch our favorite games, and he's someone I think we all look up to. Paul Carcaterra, thank you so much for taking the time to be with our community today. For those that may not be as familiar with you, can you share how you got involved with lacrosse and a little bit about your journey to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So it's great to be with you all. And, my story is actually pretty interesting. My parents weren't athletes. They grew up in New York City and lived in the Bronx. And they decided when they got married, and after my older brother was about 3 or 4 and I was 2, we moved from the Bronx to Yorktown, New York, which is a town in Westchester County, about 40 miles north of New York City. And they had no clue that they were moving into a big-time lacrosse town. Yorktown High School, multiple state championships throughout the years. But more importantly, it was like embedded in the culture of the athletics in that town. So when we moved to Yorktown, when I was in elementary school, a lot of the kids that was playing other sports with and against started playing lacrosse because they had older brothers. And I kind of got hooked through some friends who had older brothers. And, really quickly, I loved the game because it had a little bit of everything. I was playing Little League football at the time. Baseball, I was actually a decent little baseball player, but it was a little slow for me because my brain kind of just spins and I needed a little bit more. I played soccer, but lacrosse kind of just checked every box. And in Yorktown, with so many of the great athletes playing lacrosse, I ended up like idolizing and wanting to be like those high school players. I tell people all the time, I wasn't the type of kid who wanted to be the next Joe Montana or Michael Jordan. I wanted to be the next like Tim Nelson, Tom Nelson, Scott Marr, guys that lived in my town and played Yorktown High School lacrosse and went on to play collegiately. Those guys were my idols, and that's who I kind of aspired to be. So I had those idols living in my backyard, and I saw them, and they helped me, and they were great role models in terms of just teaching me the game and giving me all of that kind of juice to want to be great. So that's where it started for me, and I think that's where all the fuel has always been. To this day, the town of Yorktown is so critical in what I do, just because it's a great town, and I'm surrounded by so many friends and passionate lacrosse fans who are constantly text messaging me or DMing me and always giving me their 2 cents. And just like that feeling of a lacrosse town, I guess I'll just say one last thing about the town. It reminds me of like an Indiana basketball town or a Canadian hockey town or a Texas football town where it's like embedded in the culture.
And that's one of the things that I keep on hearing from a lot of the folks we bring on, the culture of the hotbed lacrosse town, having as a young person those role models, those guys that are playing at the highest level you can imagine, and it just inspires you to play more and to reach new heights. We all need those mentors and those leaders to inspire us to be greater than we currently are. One of the favorite things that I like to ask Paul is, what is your pinnacle lacrosse moment, or what are some of the pinnacles that really stand out to you over the past experience you've had with lacrosse?
Wow, it's tough. So when I went to Yorktown, my sophomore, junior, and senior year, we won the state championship in the state of New York. I would say that was like my town pinnacle. And that senior year was really special because, as much as you've contributed throughout the years, your senior year is like your year, and it's your team. So I would say 1993 would be the height of all of the high school pinnacle type moments. And then in college, I got to win a national championship as a sophomore at Syracuse in 1995. And that experience was so cool because I was representing my town, I was representing my team, I was representing my family, my coach, and the town could be proud of me and actually enjoy that championship as well. So 1995 was an awesome year because we weren't picked to win the national championship. Hopkins was undefeated going into the tournament, and they were the team to beat. But we really picked up steam late in the year, and the chemistry of that team was amazing. It wasn't the best team that I played on at Syracuse 95. I don't even know if it was the second best team. It was the only national championship team I played on in the 4 years. but that team had culture. It had leadership. We were one. Like that team loved each other. And I always think of that team just having pieces to the puzzle, and everyone had a role, and everyone was cool with their role too. So that was awesome. And then, after I graduated, it wasn't pro lacrosse, but my younger brother, Brian, was a goalie at Johns Hopkins. And I think the experience of being an older brother, watching him in his career was just as satisfying, if not more than my own career, because I felt like I've always been a great friend of his, along being, his older brother, but I was a bit of a mentor, and I felt really good about his success. I mean, he was the National Goalie of the Year at Johns Hopkins. He's second all time in saves. He's played in multiple Final Fours. So those years watching him when I was away from the game was super special for me. Very stressful too, because the goalie position in lacrosse is brutal. Like, I used to get sick to my stomach watching him play and during warmups, where when I played all my life, like I really didn't get nervous. It's the same like with work. And when I go on air, I don't really get nervous. I get more nervous for other people. I have a daughter now who's 11 who plays lacrosse. Like, I get nervous watching her, and I'm really quiet. I'm to myself, and kind of reminds me of the days when I was watching my brother as a goalie. I would sit by myself. I really didn't interact too much. If I was talking to you before the game, I really wasn't even there. I was nice to everyone. Hey, what's going on? How you doing? But like, my mind was elsewhere.
So it sounds like, for me, it's really your lacrosse story of representing your town, being a part of a team that was won, and then now that's the family aspect of getting to see your brother perform at the highest level and really perform. You really empathize with him, or are trying to give your energy to him, just like your daughter now.
Yeah, for sure. This is such a special sport, and my goal as a parent isn't my daughter to achieve some level of greatness in terms of accolades or statistics or championships. It's to be involved in this game so she can experience what I experienced in terms of like the building of friendships and understanding team. I tell people all the time, like, who have friends and their kids are kind of going through the recruiting process, I'm like, don't worry about where he or she ends up. Like, he or she will be a better person by being involved in this game and playing college lacrosse because of the fraternal feel and just how you feel like you're part of a bigger picture. And so many people get caught up in like, oh, I want to go to Syracuse, Johns Hopkins, North Carolina, Virginia. Like, there's so many schools out there that provide the most important thing. And that's like that team feeling and the coach that you play for and the culture that's been embedded in that program will carry you for the rest of your life. It did it for me.
Absolutely. And it's done it for me as well, and so many others. And that's really the premise of this conversation right now, is diving into that and making sure that if you don't understand or you're not able to recognize what you can gain from the sport, that you can start to be privy to that and open up to your mind to something that you don't know that you don't even know. In that respect, Paul, what does leadership mean to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, leadership, I think, has a common thread, regardless if it's sports, if it's professional life, if it's family life. I think leadership is connecting with people. That's how I would define leadership more than anything. It's not the overall knowledge of a certain type of, a certain bucket, or whether it's sports or business with banking, or if you're a musician and you're teaching, a certain type of instrument, or you're a professor at a renowned institution that's known for a certain type of discipline. Like, leadership is connecting with people, because whatever you're involved with in life, you need to be inspired. And the only way that you're going to feel inspired is by being around someone, a male or a female, that makes you want to be there and that makes you feel good about it. I think about like my coach at Syracuse, Roy Simmons Jr. He was not, and this is no slight at him, he was not a great X's and O's coach in terms of like coming up with schemes and plans to beat teams. But he empowered his players, and we loved being there. We loved him. We wanted to win for him. We wanted to be part of that team, that program. And the X's and O's were secondary because we had enough X's and O's, and it's a pretty simple game. Like, someone needs to draw a slide. You need to support your teammates on defense, and if you master the skills, the coaching is more about pushing you to be the best that you can be. And I know that's really cliche, but I think when you connect with people you can be a better leader. And a leader also speaks the truth. And the truth isn't always what people want to hear. Because when you build a culture and when you connect with someone, you want to know what's wrong with you, or you want to know what you did wrong or how you could be better. So I think when people think of leaders, oftentimes they think of humans that just are able to come up with the best phrases or terms or the best plans. Sometimes you have to take a detour or two, depending on the person or the people that you're working with. You change, and you have to be kind of a chameleon and understand that, like, you're different than me. Like how I would treat you is different than how you would treat me. And I think that's really important, because the whole idea of like everyone should be created equally is like, no, you have to understand people are different. People come from different backgrounds. You have to understand what their story is. And if you're comfortable in that group, and the more that you know about someone and the more that you embrace their differences, I think the better leader you can be. And, I think back to all my experiences, the best leaders at times told me things that weren't easy to hear. And I didn't at the time maybe think they were right. But it was a growing opportunity. You don't grow unless you're stopped in your tracks sometimes and you're told, like, okay, this isn't the way to do things, or, you need to be better at this. You need to support this person better. So speaking the truth is critical in terms of being a leader.
And so what I'm hearing, Paul, is a leader is able to empathize. They're able to understand the different perspectives of their team to ultimately be able to communicate authentically and honestly, to ultimately pull out the full capacity of their team.
Absolutely. And going back to Coach Simmons, like, he didn't treat us all the same. He needed to teach the game of lacrosse and the game of life differently to, player X, to player Y, to player Z, like, because each person had a different circumstance or had a different path or journey to get there. He's going to be a little bit more of a father figure when he knows there's a player on his team maybe that lost a parent, or there's a player on his team that might look different than every other player on the team. And you have to understand that as a coach, and you have to be able to empathize, but also make that person feel really good about being part of the team and about being different. Because in a locker room, there are a lot of differences, and you have to embrace those differences. And, I was really blessed growing up. My father did an amazing job raising us. I mean, he's really super bright man who had multiple academic scholarships throughout high school and college, and went to a private high school in New York City. There were 600 boys, and his family couldn't afford it. He was on a full academic scholarship. He graduated 6th out of 600, and decided to stay in New York City. He taught in the South Bronx for 32 years in the poorest congressional district in America. And he exposed us to a lot as young kids. And he opened our eyes up to a lot. So, I thank him all the time in the back of my mind, because, like, there's no person or there's no group and there's no situation that I ever feel like I'm comfortable talking to people. And that's because of my daddy. He taught us to understand there are differences in this world, and you need to treat people differently based on their story. And everyone's story is completely different, and the path that they've taken is not the same as everyone else. So I think that's really important too. Like, we always hear, like, treat everyone the same. Like, of course you treat everyone the same in terms of what you give from your heart, but you need to be aware of the differences in people's lives, because people have a lot of stuff going on. Me as an example, like, everyone sees me on TV and thinks like I probably have the best life in the world. Like, home's tough. I got a 13-year-old boy who's autistic, and he's going through puberty right now. And if you combine 13 years old, middle school age, every parent in America is like, oh, it's brutal. Combine that with being a boy who's going through puberty, combine that with being on the autism spectrum, like, every day is a challenge. And it's a great growing opportunity for me and him and my wife and my daughter. And it's made us way stronger, and we're blessed for those experiences. But it's tough at times. And I think when I've lived the life that I've lived, I'm aware of the fact that, like, people don't have it easy. Like, No one has it perfect. You don't have it easy. Like if you really wanted to like strip it down layer by layer, everyone's got stuff going on in their lives. And I think a leader and a person who can make someone feel important as part of that team understands that, and they learn about the person. That's really critical. I mean, the best coaches in the world just know their players the most. They know the temperature of the room. They have a pulse on their team. It's not like, how great of an X's and O's person. You could break a zone defense down, or, you're running the big little, or you're running, some kind of a 1-4-1 scrape offense. That is what it is, right? The great coaches inspire the young generation to want to be there, but also feel special because the coach knows about the person.
Oh, Paul, you said so many great things that I want to hit on this, and I love the conclusion of the great coaches inspire, but they make you feel like you want to be there. There's that emotional intelligence side of everything that we do where we can connect, empathize, but I really want to move this conversation more towards equity and equality, because you said we should all treat with love everyone out there, but we all have different upbringings, different perspectives, different life, and that's why not everyone is treated the same way, because some people need a little bit more support. And ultimately, a leader's job is to make sure that that weakest rung is able to be brought as high as everyone else so that you are able to succeed as a team. Can you talk a little bit more about culture and how you create an environment where you are able to be successful as a whole, whether it's from your experience or whether it's from the culture that you've seen with your experience following and reporting on all the collegiate lacrosse?
Yeah, I've been around college athletics for, now a good part of, 25, 27 years, whether as a player and now doing what I do from a television perspective. I think the great leaders prepare their teams for what's next after, in this case, lacrosse, and it can be any sport. And I think the best way a leader can do that is to have a locker room that embraces a lot of differences. And within those differences, those players feel safe about being there. And that will train, and that will give every other player an experience that will last a lifetime. And I guess an example of this would be, if there's a player who has some differences from another player or from the majority of the room, the player that's given that opportunity, you're changing his or her life, right? But what's also important is if it's done right and a leader and a coach educates and has an open type of dialogue with the team, because every team comes up with challenges. And, there's been some great learning opportunities over the last year, whether it was, everything through the pandemic and then all of the, the racial tension in the United States over the last year. That was such a unique and wonderful opportunity for coaches to lead and to have an open policy in terms of the way people communicate and the way they talk to each other. And if that was done properly, you have a way more transparent locker room, whether it's college football, which I've covered for many years now, college lacrosse, college basketball, it can be any sport. When you have these conversations and people feel safe about having the conversations and people feel safe about telling you how they feel about them, those are opportunities and situations that I think people will grow from. My father, I go back to talking about him. When he taught in the South Bronx, he taught many, young Black males and females, many Hispanic males and females. And we were around him growing up all the time. And when he taught night school and he was teaching camps in the summertime in the Bronx, we were always with him. And he gave us the greatest tools a father could ever give his sons and his daughter. And I say that because every single time we were down there with him, he would explain to us maybe what certain people are going through. And then we would feel comfortable talking to people. And we were like, we felt safe about it. And like to this day, I'm totally comfortable with having conversations with anyone. And, I look at like my sister and her life. I mean, she's a white girl from Westchester County, and she ended up marrying a Black man and has 3 biracial children. And, my father gave her the confidence to feel good about doing what she wanted to do with her heart. And I applaud him and her for those types of things, but he just educated. So we talk about coaches all the time as leaders. Like the number one leader in my life was my dad, because he taught us how to be part of conversations and how to have, like you were mentioning, empathy before, but using that empathy as like a teaching tool and a conversation piece for others.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time. And I know we're running up on time. I can't let this conversation go any further, though, without acknowledging Bronx Lacrosse on your sweater. Can you just share a little bit about that for the group out here that isn't familiar with it?
Yeah, sure. So my younger brother, who was the goalie at Johns Hopkins, was talking about Brian Carcaterra. He's on the board there. But the person who runs Bronx Lacrosse, Danny Leventhal, he's known Danny for many years, and his father, Ira, and my brother Brian have done business in the past. And when Danny really took the initiative to start Bronx Lacrosse, it was something my family really wanted to get behind, in terms of just like all their different fundraising endeavors and different types of events. And then my brother joining the board, it just seemed seamless for us to be part of Bronx, because we were born in the Bronx. My dad taught in the Bronx for 32 years. The sport of lacrosse is so big for us in terms of just who we are. So it made the most sense, to be honest with you, to join someone like Danny and help him as much as we can. And he's working so hard day to day and doing an amazing job, just giving young boys and girls opportunities, and what they did during the pandemic, helping feed families and making sure students had opportunities to learn online, and getting them the technology to not have too much of a pause, because we all hit serious pauses during the pandemic, and they were hit really, really hard. So anything that we could do on our family's front to help Bronx Lacrosse, and my brother most specifically has really, really done a great job in terms of just rallying the troops to get behind and help the fundraising and give boys and girls an opportunity to enjoy the game of lacrosse, but to be part of what I mentioned earlier, the fraternity type feel for the rest of a young boy or a young girl's life. It's just the magnitude of that is so big, because these kids that are playing lacrosse in the Bronx, like, they do better in school during the season, and they do better when they're busy, and they do better when they have opportunities to feel like they're part of something bigger than them. So that's what it's all about. It's not about like sending kids to Johns Hopkins and Syracuse and North Carolina. In time, that will happen. But I think, Danny and his group are just amazing. I'm so proud of the work that they've done. And, my brother Brian and the rest of the board and people like Wendy Frieder they're just amazing. I give them all the credit. I've tried to build awareness through my platform. But I can't take any of the credit from a day-to-day operations standpoint. Those people just work so hard, giving those boys and girls opportunities. But anything I can do to help, where I've hosted some of their fundraising endeavors, and I've rallied some of the troops to help support as well. And super proud of that. But the real heroes in Bronx Lacrosse are the people like Danny Leventhal and the board, and most importantly, the kids.
It's amazing the opportunities that lacrosse gives to kids at the end of the day, to be able to connect, have that family aspect, be better versions of themselves. And I think we both realize that's what lacrosse has done for us, is a strong foundation, and hopefully they get more opportunities to see that as well and be a part of something bigger than themselves. I know, Paul, that this is wrapping up on time. Are there any last thoughts that you have, though, that you'd like to share with our community?
No, no, but yes. I think the game of lacrosse is at such a great kind of point in time in terms of like the history of the sport. I look at the game as ever changing, and the opportunities that the boys and girls can get in this game. I just think it's incredible. And I go back to the days where I was playing in college in the mid to late 90s. College rosters, men's lacrosse and women's lacrosse, were just totally littered with Northeast and Mid-Atlantic players, and the game has grown so much, and it's amazing to see, whether it's out in Arizona where you are, or Texas, or Florida, or California. There's great boys and girls players everywhere. There's a full conference affiliation on the women's front in the Pac-12, like to have, teams like Arizona State and USC and Stanford and Oregon. Like it's amazing that they have, women's lacrosse out there. I never would have dreamed of that. And I think the opportunities for boys and girls to play the game, and there's always a place for a boy or a girl to continue to play. And there's so many schools out there that are getting behind lacrosse, whether it's Division I, Division II, Division III, and the opportunities that the players will get as a result of, putting themselves out there and taking a chance and starting something new in a game. It's great. So the more representation that we can have, if you look at it like geographically in the States, but also the more that we can embrace the game looking different, whether it's, to just give more of an inclusive feel to young boys and girls, like at Bronx Lacrosse, and, and Harlem Lacrosse does an amazing job. And there's the Owls out in Chicago, like to go into some of these underserved areas and give players an opportunity. It could change generational type of thinking in terms of promoting, the sport of lacrosse as one, so it looks more inclusive and it feels more inclusive, but it changes generational type thinking in terms of like what the player wants to do to continue to push the sport forward. And I say that by, if a young boy or a girl is given an opportunity to play the game, a lot of times I've seen it firsthand, they stay involved in the game and they change the next generation. So the more that we can get into all different types of places, suburban areas, urban areas, the more that the game is more inclusive, the more that the game, doesn't look the same, the better it will be long-term, because people will feel like, okay, I feel more confident playing the game because so-and-so plays it, and he or she might look like me, or he or she might think like me, or he or she might have a similar background that I've had. And I think that the more that we can kind of just have that as a priority for the sport ends up changing, because a young boy and a girl, like my dream one day is, for a young boy or a girl to turn on ESPN and watch the men's national championship or the women's national championship. And regardless of where that person is from, or regardless of the background that person has, they can look at the field of play and say, wow, he or she looks like me, or he or she has a similar story to me. And I feel like this sport is a sport that is worth for me continuing to play because he or she is playing, and that's an inspiration to me. So one day, and we're not there, we have a lot of work to do, but my goal and my wishes would be for any boy or girl in this country to turn on an ESPN game, watch a national championship, and it just looks like an inclusive sport. And there's people that are putting a lot of effort and time and resources into being more inclusive. We're not there as a sport right now, and my hope and dreams are that we are one day.
Well, Paul, we've got a lot of work to go, which is what you've said, but having that dream and vision is massive. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspective of lacrosse, leadership, culture with us. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you. It's great spending time with you all.